I want to ask Kathy a few questions, and gosh, there's so much that I want to ask. But let me start with this. I love this book. I hope those of you who haven't had a chance to look at it, it really is a very powerful book. And one of my favorite quotes from your book is this: "The goal of higher education is greater than workforce readiness. It's world readiness." And you know, I actually have to say that I sometimes find myself sort of struggling against two extremes. There's a lot of people today who basically want to say college is about getting a job, and the value of every program is what's your sort of starting salary. And I think that's just really wrong-headed. But I also want to resist the college is just about like liberal arts for life, and you know, just the kind of doubling down on we don't have to worry about preparing our students for that first job. And so what I loved about your book is that, you know, you are committed to helping, and we heard it from here, you know, heard it here. You are committed to challenging colleges to do more to prepare students for life, but you also broaden that to world readiness. So what is that? What is world readiness?
So first of all, whenever a professor says to me, oh, college is not about job preparation, that degrades college, I say, well, did you go to graduate school? Graduate school is where professors get prepared to be professors, right? And we don't really hire professors unless they've been to graduate school. So it seems pretty hypocritical to me. But if you know the job you're going to have the rest of your life, you're a rare person. Right? The average 26-year-old, the average 30-year-old has already had 5 jobs. And contrary to public opinion, that hasn't changed in about 40 years. It's really about the same. The difference is many of those jobs are contingent, or, there's all kinds of issues. But it's a pretty rare person that takes one path in life. So the trick is how you prepare students for the first job, but in a way that allows them to feel the freedom to say, am I happy in this job? Is this the job I want? Is the biggest possible salary and living in the biggest possible house that requires the biggest possible salary what I want? Or would I say, actually, because we know, for example, now a recent study from Pew showed that the job trajectory for humanities majors is exactly the same as STEM majors, and 20 years out, job satisfaction is the same. The difference is salary differential. But if you don't spend as much, you don't need as much. For some people, having a phenomenally large house and luxuries is a necessity. That's their goal in life. They need a job that pays for that much, or they're going to have a problem. For other people, it isn't. Learning how you understand that about yourself is really huge, because everything in our society is telling you, and I think that is more your generation than ever before, that you have to be the top student at the top school with the top grades to get the top job, or your life is over. I mean, the typical student now has been through 100, before they go to college, has taken 112 high-stakes summative tests of the kind where somebody's saying, this goes on your permanent record. I actually think that's a form of child abuse. For my last book, as I said, I was writing about K through 12, and one principal said to me, before our high-stakes North Carolina, this is when I was still at Duke and living in North Carolina, before our North Carolina end-of-year exams, I had students having mental breakdowns, their parents had mental breakdowns, the teachers had mental breakdowns. He said, heck, I had a mental breakdown last year. He wasn't talking metaphorically. We're really in a bad situation. So world readiness is also a meta knowledge of who you are and what you need to lead the life that you want to lead. Knowing what your values are, and knowing what is a good match and what isn't a good match for those values. Right? That sounds like a cliche or superficial. It's actually, I think, the hardest thing for any of us to do. It takes courage to stray off one path you've been set on for your life. Although, in fact, most of us do it. I bet you I could turn the microphone over to many people in this room who are over, say, 40. And you'd find a lot of different stories about lives that had a crossroads where people went in one direction, and it would have surprised their 20-year-old self that they took that direction. So that kind of self-knowledge, I think, both makes you world ready and makes you workforce ready. I also think we have to learn as a society, we have to take far, far greater control of our world. We're just on the verge of losing democracy. Just on the verge. If every American isn't saying, wait, we're a democracy and we think our voting machines were all hacked, and we're not saying that's the end of democracy, if that's not a national crisis, we're in a crisis. We're beyond a crisis. Whatever your politics are, and many other issues as well. And I hope world readiness is also saying, I believe in American values. I don't think it was a bill of goods. I think there are some really good things about freedom and democracy, and I want to know how to fight for those. I really want to know how to be prepared to fight for those. Whether it's getting out the vote, making sure I vote, not sleeping in and missing my chance to vote, taking personal responsibility, or organizing. I think that's crucially a world readiness skill.
It's great. You know, as we think about making people world ready, one of the interviews that you did with your nieces and nephews toward the end of the book, I was very struck by that. One of the students you interviewed said, well, everybody says I need to collaborate, and we have collaborative projects, but nobody teaches me how to collaborate. So I'd love to hear, because this is actually something we've struggled with here and continue to struggle with, is how do we teach teamwork? How do we engage students? So share with us what you would advise.
So I do a lot of, not as much now that I'm at a public university, which I find fascinating, but when I was at Duke, I did a lot of corporate work where I would go in and talk to CEOs and CIOs about their own collaborative techniques. It always seemed really ironic because I was also working with the MacArthur Foundation on a project for K through 12. I'd go into 6th grade and the teacher would say, you go collaborate. And I was like, wow, John Chambers brought me to Cisco to talk to his top CIOs and CEOs in the world to help them learn to collaborate, and the 6th grade teacher is telling a bunch of 6th graders, you go collaborate, as if it were easy to do. I mean, those folks, those Cisco folks, are the world's geniuses at that, and they need help. So why are we just assuming 6th graders do? And I think that's what we usually do. Form in groups of 4 and do a project together. And we all know what that means, right? One dutiful person is gonna do the project. One lazy person is gonna just kind of be charming and hope they get the good grade. And the other 2 are somewhere in between. So I actually think the alternative to grading and the alternative to collaboration are the same things. And I've done many different versions, and I always have my students help me come up with versions. We work as a group to figure out how we're going to make collaborations work. And one of the most profound ways, and I'm going to tell a sad story, I think, as part of this, I might not, but I think I will. But one of the ways is I have, if I divide students into teams of 4, I have the team come up with the 10 or 12 things they think make up a good collaborator. We make a list. We usually do it online. Then we do a week's work on the project. We set the specs for the week, and they work on the project. They come back, and I have the team separate and never give an F. I don't believe in that failure. But to give a badge or a gold star or a point or something to the person on the team that they think deserves it. You don't have to give a badge. The person who deserves it in any one of those 12 things. Then everyone comes back together, and I usually do that where I always, because my methods are pretty unusual, so I always have a team of apprentice teachers who are working with me. I or somebody else is there as the 4 people come together and see for the first time if they've gotten any badges. Wow. Does that make people feel accountable? Right? If somebody's got 12 badges and no one else on the team has any, we got a problem. Right? But there's things like, this is from my coder world, being a fire starter. Fire starter can be the flakiest person in the world, but they're the person that always comes up with a genius idea that no one else would have thought of, and it solves the problem. Right? There's also a badge for implementer. The person who doesn't come up with that idea, but says, that sounds lame-brained, but I think I've got an idea about how it'll work. Somebody else who's the person who's the editor. That is so important. We have to present this to other people. How do we edit? So the group has already determined as a collective what counts to make their project work, and then they grade people. my sad story was that somebody at Duke who was the captain of one of the sports, I'll try to keep this vague, who was also a star in the theater, whose father was a very, very, very famous entertainment lawyer. He was planning on going on to Hollywood and have a Hollywood career. He looked like a young Adonis. He came back to his group and nobody had given him a badge in anything. I was teaching with Dan Ariely at the time, who was a social psychologist, and we had just done a lesson on how beautiful people often get a pass in this world. This young man turned his back on me and the apprentice teacher, said, I owe my group an apology. Let me have this time. He looked at them and said, I've totally let you down. I had no idea I was flaking out that badly. I'm not starting at 0, I'm starting at less than 0. You have to give me something that you don't want to do, that I can do, so I can be on the same ground, and I promise I will contribute from now on. He came up to us afterwards and said, I was that person you were talking about in that lecture. I had no idea. The world's been giving me a pass. I didn't even know. And that's the point. It's like white privilege, right? You don't know you're given. No one says you get to go what is it in Monopoly? You get to go whatever, that thing. Say it, someone else. You get to go past go, right? He didn't know. So that's one of many techniques where you actually are teaching students how to collaborate as they're collaborating. And also giving a system of accountability where students themselves feel accountable to the project, not just to themselves. For me, that's worked amazingly well, amazingly well. And I've done many, many, many variations of this over the years. And my students help me come up with variations over the years. But the key part is every member of the team feels they're responsible to a project, not to themselves. And everyone knows that every member of the team is responsible to that project and will give them fair feedback that will help them collaborate better and to grow as human beings. Because the biggest problem with that failing grade or any high-stakes summative test is you actually that's the end point instead of the beginning. And we know from Ebbinghaus on, it is for most knowledge, right? It's like a cliff. Pass the final exam, shoop. When you're doing this kind of collaborative work, you're also learning how to get feedback from others in order that you can be a better participant in the world. That's also world readiness. You know, that's not only workforce readiness, that is world readiness. It's an amazing skill. We've got lots of workplace surveys and data surveys, especially from Google. Recent one from Project Oxygen, another one, Project Aristotle by Google, of why that is such a crucially important skill. It's the single number one way that people, turns out, rise to the ranks at Google to become managers, is knowing how to collaborate well and how not to bully people who are in their collaborative groups or take advantage of people in their collaborative groups.
That's great. I have a ton of other questions, but I'm just going to ask you one last question, and then I know we have a closing hymn to complete our convocation. Since it is Founders Day, you have given in your book, in your talk today, so many really, inspiring and challenging prompts for ways in which we need to change education. What do you see as continuities in education? Are there things about really good teaching and learning today that you think haven't changed since Socrates? Is it how much is revolutionarily changed? How much is?
So one of the things I fight is not only the workplace thing, but a movement called unbundling, which says, and this is happening at many state universities, we just want to focus on skills, and we're going to get rid of everything else. It just seems like a tragedy, because the positive part of universities is every university is this bundle of an incredible mix of knowledge that really doesn't occur many other places in society. So I would say the continuity from Socrates forward is a community of co-learners who don't all have the same interests, who don't all have the same aptitudes and skills, but who all have made a voluntary commitment to take time out from their lives to learn something. Unlike K through 12, nobody says you have to go to college. Nobody says you have to stay in college. Right? That you can drop out. that you're making a voluntary commitment to learn in a community with other learners. It's pretty amazing. So to me, that is a precious, priceless opportunity. We're on the verge of losing that in our country as well. Really, it's under such attack, including the whole ideology. It's like fake news. All news is fake, all higher education is bad. This is a drumbeat we're hearing now, and it seems like if we don't fight for what is good in higher education and work to make higher education far better, we're going to lose something so precious for any society. Exactly at the time that other countries are reinvesting in higher education in a massive way. So I think that's what I would say is the biggest value. We're all learning together. That to me is what it's all about.
Thank you. Thank you so much.